Today, we're going over genius war tactics that look like pure insanity. Hannibal Barca and the Battle of Cannae. It's August 2nd to 16 BC. The Roman Senate has just made one of the greatest military miscalculations in history. They have assembled the largest army Rome has ever put in the field, 80,000 infantry, 6,000 cavalry, and they are marching it toward a Carthaginian general named Hannibal Barca. Their plan is simple: crush him with overwhelming force. End this. What they do not yet understand is that Hannibal has been waiting for exactly this moment. That the size of their army is not their advantage, it is his. To understand what Hannibal was about to do at Cannae, you need to understand what he had already done to get there. 2 years earlier, he had marched 40,000 men across the Alps in the middle of winter, losing thousands along the way to conditions that should have destroyed his army before it ever reached Italy. He emerged onto the Italian plain and proceeded to destroy every Roman force sent against him. At the Trebia River, he lured a Roman army into a freezing crossing at dawn and broke them. At Lake Trasimene, he hid his entire army in fog along a hillside and ambushed 30,000 Romans marching through a valley below. Rome was in a state of controlled panic, and now they had decided to end it with 80,000 men and sheer overwhelming force. Hannibal looked at that decision and saw a trap he could walk them into. The Roman plan was straightforward: mass their legions in an extraordinarily dense formation, deeper than normal, tighter than normal, and drive them straight into the center of Hannibal's line. The sheer weight of 80,000 men pushing forward would fold the Carthaginian center, and the battle would be over. It was a completely reasonable plan. It was exactly wrong. Hannibal arranged his army in a formation nobody had ever seen before. His weakest troops, Gallic and Spanish infantry, he placed at the very center, pushing them forward into a convex bulge toward the Romans. His best African infantry, he positioned on the flanks, set back and angled inward. His cavalry, his strongest arm, he placed on both wings. His Roman counterparts looked at this arrangement and saw exactly what Hannibal wanted them to see: a weak center waiting to be hit. It was the most expensive bait in the history of warfare. The battle opened with Hannibal's heavy cavalry destroying the Roman horsemen on the flanks, riding directly across the rear of the entire Roman formation to eliminate the cavalry on the opposite wing as well. The Roman flanks were now completely exposed. But the Roman infantry didn't know that yet. They were pushing forward into Hannibal's center, and it was working. The Gallic troops were giving ground, bending under the massive Roman advance. The Romans pressed harder, packed tighter. So tightly packed the men could barely raise their weapons properly. And then, the center stopped retreating. What had been a curve pushing toward Rome was now a curve wrapping around the Romans. And the African infantry on both flanks began to rotate, like doors closing on a room full of people. By the end of the day, between 47,000 and 70,000 Romans were dead. The two consuls who had commanded the army, one killed, one fled in disgrace. Rome lost more men at Cannae in a single afternoon than the United States lost in the entire Vietnam War. Hannibal walked the battlefield afterward. His cavalry commander came to him and told him, "March on Rome now. You will be dining in the capital within 5 days." Hannibal said no. He needed to rest his men first. His cavalry commander stared at him. Then he said something historians have been quoting ever since. "You know how to win a victory, Hannibal. You do not know how to use one." He was right. Hannibal never marched on Rome. He stayed in Italy for 13 more years, winning battle after battle, never losing in the field, while Rome rebuilt its armies, learned from Cannae, and took the war to Carthage itself. The Roman general Scipio Africanus studied Cannae so carefully that he used a variation of the same encirclement tactic against Hannibal at the Battle of Zama, the battle that ended the war and ended Carthage as a major power. Hannibal spent the rest of his life in exile, hunted by Rome across the Mediterranean. Cornered in Bithynia at 64 with nowhere left to run, He swallowed poison rather than be taken. He had never lost a battle in Italy. He had invented the most studied tactical maneuver in military history, and he died alone in a foreign country. Running from the enemy he had once held at his mercy on the plains of Cannae. History remembers what he did at that battle, what he failed to do after it, that haunted him to the end. The Trojan horse. It's somewhere around 1180 BC, and the greatest siege in the ancient world has been going on for 10 years. 10 years. Think about what that means in human terms. The soldiers who arrived at Troy as young men are now approaching middle age. Some of them have spent the better part of their adult lives camped on a beach in front of walls they cannot breach. They have fought thousands of skirmishes, several major battles, and the walls of Troy are still standing. The Greeks had the greatest warriors of their generation. And still, the walls stood. The city could not be taken by force. Every approach had been tried and failed. And then Odysseus had an idea. Odysseus proposed building a large wooden horse, not as a weapon, as a gift, as a religious offering left on the beach when the Greek fleet sailed away. Visible evidence that the Greeks had given up and gone home, leaving an offering to the gods to ensure safe passage. Inside the horse, hidden in a hollow chamber, would be a select group of Greek warriors, the best ones. The ones who could hold their nerve in complete darkness and silence for hours, while a city celebrated around them. The Trojans would find the horse on the empty beach. They would argue about what to do with it, and eventually, they would drag it inside the walls. Because leaving a religious offering to the gods outside the gates was worse luck than bringing it in. The plan had approximately 40 things that could go wrong. They built it. The horse was enormous, large enough to conceal a significant number of armed men in a hollow chamber within its body. When it was finished, the Greek fleet made a show of sailing away. The Trojans woke the next morning to an empty beach. No camp, no ships, no Greeks. Just a horse, standing alone on the sand where an army had been the day before. And they did exactly what Odysseus had predicted they would do. They came down from the walls to look at it. They argued about what it was and what to do with it. And then, slowly, inevitably, they began dragging it toward the gates. The Trojans had a prophetess named Cassandra. She took one look at the horse and told everyone exactly what it was and exactly what would happen if they brought it inside the walls. She had the gift of prophecy and the curse that nobody ever believed her. She screamed, she wept, she begged. The Trojans patted her on the head and kept pulling. A Trojan priest named Laocoon threw a spear at the horse and declared it was a trick. The gods sent to sea serpents that killed him on the spot. The Trojans took this as confirmation that the horse was sacred and the gods did not want it harmed. Troy dragged its own destruction through its own gates and celebrated. Inside the horse, in complete darkness, the Greek warriors waited. Hours passed. The city celebrated around them. Music, voices, the sounds of a population releasing 10 years of siege tension in a single night. And then, something happened that the ancient sources include almost in passing, as if it is entirely normal. One of the Greek soldiers' wives had apparently come to Troy with him. During the night, she walked around the outside of the horse, calling out the names of the Greek warriors inside, in the voices of their wives, trying to get them to answer. They did not answer. One of them, Anticlus, apparently started to respond. Odysseus physically held his mouth shut in the darkness until the woman went away. Inside the horse, in the dark, one man's hand over another man's mouth. The fate of an entire war balanced on whether a soldier could hold his nerve when he heard his wife's voice calling his name. At midnight, the city was asleep. The celebration had exhausted itself. The guards were at their posts, but the threat that had occupied their minds for 10 years was gone, sailed away, defeated, finished. Odysseus gave the signal. The Greeks climbed out of the horse. They moved through the sleeping city. They opened the gates. And the fleet, which had not actually sailed away, but had hidden behind a nearby island, came back. The city that had held for 10 years against the greatest army Greece could assemble fell in a single night. Not to battering rams, not to siege engines, to a wooden horse and the willingness of an entire civilization to see what they wanted to see rather than what was actually in front of them. George Washington crosses the Delaware. It's Christmas night, 1776, and the American Revolution is approximately 2 weeks from being over. Not struggling, not in difficulty, over. The Continental Army has been systematically dismantled as a fighting force across the summer and autumn of 1776. Washington had been outgeneraled, outmaneuvered, and outfought at every engagement. New York fell, New Jersey fell. The Continental Army retreated across the Delaware River into Pennsylvania with fewer than 6,000 men. Many of them sick, many without shoes in December, all of them demoralized to a degree that was becoming indistinguishable from collapse. The British commander looked at the situation and decided the most efficient thing to do was wait. Washington looked at the same situation and saw something completely different. The British commander Lord Howe had gone into winter quarters. The Hessian garrison, German mercenaries fighting for the British, had settled into Trenton, New Jersey, under a capable officer named Colonel Rawl. Rawl had performed well throughout the campaign and had no reason to expect anything unusual. He established his garrison and settled in for an uneventful winter. Meanwhile, the enlistment terms of most of Washington's soldiers expired on January 1st, in 1 week. If Washington could not pay them, which he couldn't, and could not give them a reason to re-enlist, the army would simply dissolve. Men would go home. The revolution would end, not with a final battle, but with a quiet dispersal of frozen, unpaid men deciding that this particular idea had not worked out. Washington understood this completely, which is why he was standing at that riverbank on Christmas night. Washington was going to cross the Delaware River at night, in a blizzard, on Christmas, with 2,400 men, 18 artillery pieces, and horses, in wooden boats, through a river choked with massive chunks of moving ice that could hold a boat and sink it in minutes. His own generals told him it was madness. He listened to them carefully. Then he gave the order to prepare the boats, because he understood one thing with complete clarity. If he did nothing, he lost, not eventually, in days. So he was going to do something. And this was the something available to him. The crossing began at dusk on December 25th, and immediately went wrong in the way that crossings of ice-choked rivers in blizzards at night tend to go wrong. The boats were slower than planned. The ice was worse than expected. To other planned crossings, diversionary forces meant to support Washington's attack had to be abandoned entirely when the conditions made them impossible. The operation fell hours behind schedule. By the time the last man and the last artillery piece were across the river, it was 3 a.m., still 9 miles to Trenton, in a blizzard that had turned into a mix of sleet and hail driving directly into the faces of men marching in broken shoes. Washington's officers told him they should turn back. The plan was already compromised. The element of surprise might be gone. The men were exhausted. Washington looked at them. They kept marching. At Trenton, Colonel Rawl had received warnings. A loyalist informant had sent him a note that morning warning him that Washington was planning an attack. Rawl was in the middle of a card game when the note arrived. He tucked it in his pocket and read. He never read it. When Washington's force hit Trenton from 2 directions, simultaneously at approximately 8 a.m., the Hessians scrambled into the streets in confusion, trying to organize a defense in sleet and chaos. Rawl managed to form his men and counterattack twice, but Washington's artillery, dragged across an ice-choked river in a blizzard, somehow still operational, dominated every street intersection and made organized resistance impossible. The battle lasted approximately 45 minutes. Washington lost no men in combat. The soldiers froze to death on the march. the only American casualties of the operation. Nearly 900 Hessians were captured. Washington had the prisoners marched through Philadelphia, so the population could see them. The news spread through the colonies like fire. The army that everyone said was finished had crossed an ice river on Christmas night in a blizzard and taken a fortified garrison. Enlistments reversed. Men who had been walking home turned around. France, which had been watching the revolution with cautious interest, began to take it seriously as something that might actually succeed. Washington followed Trenton with another victory at Princeton 10 days later, and the revolution, which had been 2 weeks from dissolving on a frozen Pennsylvania riverbank, continued.